There are over 25,000 unique cards in Magic the Gathering, but how many are truly unplayable in the Commander format? This video, I want to talk about a 25-year-old card from Mercadian Masks that does something very unique in red. Kyren Negotiations. Kyren Negotiations is a red enchantment that costs 2 generic and 2 red mana. It has only one ability: tap an untapped creature you control. This enchantment deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. While its ability might sound simple, this card does a lot more than you'd think. And considering that it's only being played in 4,500 decks according to EDH Rec, I have to wonder if people just aren't aware it exists. Either way, let's take a look at a few strategies that can really take advantage of this strange red enchantment. First, any deck built around making creature tokens will likely get a lot of mileage out of Kyren Negotiations. Many of these decks are already running cards like Impact Tremors to take advantage of their small creatures hitting the battlefield. And that's a great card that you absolutely should include. But what if you draw your Impact Tremors after you've already made all your tokens? Kyren Negotiations solves this problem. It lets you similarly turn your small creatures into direct damage, only it doesn't matter when you play it. Since the ability is tied to an enchantment, not the creature, it can tap down a creature that just entered the battlefield, meaning it works with any creatures you already have in play, and any creatures that might enter under your control in the future. This gives Kyren Negotiations the edge over other, somewhat similar cards like Flame Fusillade and Fury Stoke Giant. While these cards can hit creatures, which is good, their effects only last until end of turn, and they don't get around Summoning Sickness. I also should note that Kyren Negotiations only hits a single player per activation, compared to Impact Tremors, which hits each of your opponents. Maybe a better comparison is Goblin Bombardment. Goblin Bombardment is another common include in go-wide token decks, and Kyren Negotiations again pairs perfectly with that card, letting you tap your creatures for 1 damage before you sacrifice them to deal another. Now, I can't cover the many ways in which you can fill your board with creature tokens, but I do want to mention some other red cards that can take advantage of an army of small creatures. Cards like Massive Raid, Prey Caesar Dragon, Over the Top, Last Ditch Effort, Devilish Valet, Descent of Dragons, and Hellion Eruption. Bonus points to these last 2 cards as they re-trigger your Impact Tremors and let you reactivate your Kyren Negotiations. And that's just in red. Outside of red, you've got hundreds of other fun and synergistic options you can explore. Some commanders who are probably already doing this include Krenko Mob Boss, Thromok the Insatiable, Norin the Wary, Jetmir Nexus of Revels, Extus Auric Overlord's other half, Awaken the Blood Avatar, Ovika Enigma Goliath, Rith the Awakener, Xyrus the Writhing Storm, Vile Smasher Gleeful Grenadier, Prosh Sky Raider of Care, Arbaz Mir, Perforos God of the Forge, and more. Looking at these commanders on EDH Rec, Kyren Negotiations shows up in less than 4% of these decks. Moving on, Kyren Negotiations is an excellent inclusion in any deck that has 1 or more ways to boost or benefit from non-combat damage. While I'm mostly referring to cards that increase your damage, this also includes cards that generate additional value when you activate Kyren Negotiations. And while this does include cards like Solfim Mayhem Dominus or Dictate of the Twin Gods that double your non-combat damage, those will only increase Kyren Negotiations by 1 damage per activation. Cards that instead give you a flat damage increase actually work better with this strategy. Artist Talent, Mechanized Warfare, Embermaw Hellion, and Torture Pit are all examples of what I mean. And there are tons of commanders already doing this. Tai Joaquin Perfect Shot, Far Fortune End Boss, Torbrand Thane of Redfell, Torwaki the Younger, Rankle and Torbrand, O'Hare X Shonel Deepest Might, and Gearsenstarn Kellermorph, just to name a few. On the other hand, there are plenty of cards in the format that reward you for targeting your opponents and or dealing non-combat damage to them. Cards like Virtue of Courage, Chandra's Pyreling, Chandra's Incinerator, and At Knife Point, for example. Several commanders that fit this category include Magda the Horde Master, Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, Niv-Mizzet, Visionary, Ob-Nixilis, Captive Kingpin, and Marchesa, Dealer of Death. While these commanders don't increase the damage you're dealing, they each provide a benefit anytime you activate Kyren Negotiations, which I consider a damage enhancement. Finally, Kyren Negotiations is great in any deck that wants to tap down and maybe untap its creatures. In this strategy, you don't really care that Kyren Negotiations is dealing damage at all. That's great, but incidental. Instead, you're using Kyren Negotiations to fuel your engine. And there are tons of creatures in red that can benefit from being tapped down, many of which can beat your commander. Magda, Brazen Outlaw, is the most obvious choice, as you desperately want consistent ways to tap down your dwarves. Surprisingly, Kyren Negotiation shows up in just under 10% of Magda Brazen Outlaw decks. Other commanders in red that want to be tapped down include Depala, Pilot Exemplar, Saint Traft and Rem Carolas, Lulu, Loyal Hollyphant paired with a red background, Rada, Coalition Warlord, and Annie Flash, the Veteran. Depending on your colors, there are so many other non-commander creatures you can tap down for value. Night Market Lookout, Goblin Medics, Spireside Infiltrator, Wildfire Awakener, Immersturm Predator, Emara, Soul of the Accord, Sandwell, Avenger Ace, Mist Meadow Vanisher, Stonybrook Schoolmaster, Unctus, Grand Metatect, Wily Duke, Atin Hero, Phallosage, Scare Tiller, Surge Spanner, Painseer, Daring Thief, Fellhide Spiritbinder, King Makar the Gold Cursed, and Arbiter of the Ideal. And don't even get me started on cards that care about tapped creatures, like Harvest Season or Throne of the God Pharaoh. Seriously, I'm barely scratching the surface here. Then, throw in some mass untap effects like Jeskai Ascendancy, Seedborn Muse, Drumbellower, Quest for Renewal, Virtue of Loyalty, Prop Room, and maybe even Unwinding Clock, and your engine is online. If you aren't the archenemy by that point, you soon will be. While there aren't many, some other cards in red that can tap down your creatures include Flame Fusillade and Fury Stoked Giant, both of which I mentioned earlier. You've also got Burn at the Stake, Veteran's Voice, Sunshot Militia, which is sadly restricted to sorcery speed, Cracklebur, Prosperous Partnership, Impelled Giant, and Wart the Raid Mother. Okay, now I've gone over a ton of cards that could easily benefit from Kyren Negotiations, and yet, of the commanders I've mentioned so far, the only one currently using Kyren Negotiations in more than 10% of its listed decks is Saint Traft and Rem Carolas, and it's only at 11%. I think it's fair to say that Kyren Negotiations is significantly underplayed, which, in a way, answers our original question. Is Kyren Negotiations unplayable in Commander? No, not by a long shot. I give it 5.2 dumpsters out of 7, basically a perfect score. What do you think? Does Kyren Negotiations fit in any of your decks? Or has this card been power crept out of the format? Let me know in the comments below, including suggestions for cards you want me to review in the future. And as always, like and subscribe to help my channel grow.